Good afternoon, and welcome to another special presentation of the Japanese Art Society of America. During the past 18 months, our program committee has scheduled a variety of Zoom webinar programs. Ever conscious of the fact that JASA was founded as the Ukiyo-e Society of America, we know that a core component of our members are dedicated enthusiasts for Japanese prints and paintings, and those we all know were usually created on paper. Today's program will introduce us to the infinite possibilities of washi and how contemporary artists are working in this medium. Japanese art historian Meher McArthur will discuss her exhibition, Washi Transformed, New Expressions in Japanese Paper, that began a national tour at the Allentown Art Museum this past weekend. She collaborated with Hollis Goodall, curator of Japanese art at LACMA, who wrote a very informative essay in the exhibition catalog on traditional handmade paper in Japan and its history. Today, Meher will present the works of 9 Japanese artists selected for the exhibition. And these artists have each developed his or her own use of traditional Japanese handmade paper, and the results are compelling. I also would like to reintroduce Meher to many of you. She's been an especially active curator, organizing exhibitions focusing on traditional and contemporary Japanese art, particularly under the aegis of the International Arts and Artists Organization and its program of traveling exhibitions like this one. For the last 2.5 years, she's been academic curator at Scripps College of Claremont and recently joined Japan House, Los Angeles, as its art and cultural director. And many of you recall that she was associated with the Pacific Arts Asia Museum in Pasadena for many years. And so it is our pleasure to welcome Meher McArthur. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amy, for the lovely introduction. It's such an honor to be with you today and to talk to JASA about the new exhibition of Washi Transformed and the 9 wonderful Japanese artists featured in it. Now, I've been working on the exhibition Washi Transformed, New Expressions in Japanese Paper for about 5 years with the traveling exhibitions company International Arts and Artists, which is based in Washington, DC. And the idea for this exhibition really came after we had finished the tours of the 2 contemporary origami exhibitions that we've been touring, Folding Paper and then Above the Fold. And those exhibitions had taken something, a familiar craft of origami, and shown how contemporary artists had done something really amazing with it. And so I was looking for another subject that I could kind of create a similar exhibition with, taking a craft and showing how contemporary artists were really transforming it into something very new and very surprising. And my goal was really to get people to come to an exhibition expecting to see something and then see something completely different and go, wow. So I was going for a wow effect. So I'm hoping that the Washi Transformed exhibition will have that effect. Here you can see the cover of the catalog. And when I first saw this cover, I thought, wow, it looks really exciting and dramatic. So it was really, I feel like it's doing the right thing so far. Now, as Amy pointed out, the exhibition has just opened. It's just begun its national tour at the Allentown Museum in Pennsylvania. And so I'm particularly excited this week that this exhibition that I've been working on for so long is finally alive and out in the world. The exhibition basically features artists who have transformed the traditional Japanese handmade paper, or washi, into extraordinary works of contemporary art. That's the basic concept here. And I just want to share that I have seen some of the images of the installation, and I really am wowed by the works. I have not met these works in person. I've met a few of them, but most of them I've been looking at on a computer screen, and I can't wait to see them one day in person. I live 3,000 miles away from the Allentown Museum, so can't make this installation, but hope to meet the exhibition soon. First of all, I'd like to thank the Allentown Museum team for the beautiful installation, and also the International Arts and Artists team for their work, bringing the works from Japan to the United States, and to all the artists, the 9 wonderful artists who I'm going to introduce you today for working with us on this show. I'd also like to thank Hollis Goodall for being a wonderful partner in the catalog. She is a delight to work with, and that was a real treat for me. Now, as most of you know, I'm sure, the word washi is the Japanese word meaning Japanese paper. It's made up of the kanji wa and the kanji shi, which are readings of this Chinese character for peace and harmony, and the Chinese character for paper. And combined, they become washi, which is the Japanese name for the paper that's created in Japan, sort of in comparison with kanji, which was Chinese paper. Here's an example of a lovely piece of washi that I'm lucky enough to own. Somebody gave it to me years ago, and it shows the gorgeous fibers that you see in a lot of Japanese washi, and also the character for paper in archaic script here. Sort of, I don't know how they made it inside the paper, but it's written inside the paper itself. So I think it's a lovely example of what paper is and what paper can be. Now, I don't have time to go into the whole history of washi paper, but Hollis did write a wonderful essay about it, explaining it, this very complicated essay really clearly for a general reader. And I'm sure many of you will find it very valuable. Now, washi is basically made from bast fibers, which are fibers. They're the vascular tissue made from the inner bark of a number of different plants. These are bushes that grow, that are native to Japan. And using techniques introduced from China, the Japanese first started making paper in the 7th century AD. They first used hemp fiber and bark from gampi, which is a type of daphne that grows in the wild in Japan. And so this is the first of the fibers here that was used to make Japanese paper. Around the 10th century, they started to use mulberry bark, or the bark of paper mulberry, and that's known in Japanese as kozo. And this is the type of fiber that has been used most commonly to make washi paper. It has particularly long fibers, which are about 10 millimeters in length. And so they create a particularly sturdy type of paper. In the 16th century, the Japanese paper makers started to use mitsumata, another type of fiber, which allowed them to create very fine papers. And many of these papers were used in the Edo period, made out of mitsumata. And today, gampi, kozo, and mitsumata are the 3 main fibers used to create washi paper, with kozo being the favorite, really. Now, this is a wonderful image of paper making that comes from an Edo period woodblock printed illustrated book. And in order to make paper, there are several key parts of the process. And this is the process that was introduced to Japan from China. First of all, you take the bark from the bush, for example, kozo, and you boil it to soften it and break down the fibers. And then you macerate and mash the fibers into a pulp. You can see this gentleman mashing the paper into a pulp here. And then that pulp is introduced into a large vat of water, and it's mixed with the water to create a water suspension. So you've got this sort of mushy substance that is then scooped up onto a screen here. You can see that woman's holding a screen, and she will scoop up just the right amount of paper to make a single of pulp water suspension to make a single sheet of paper using the screen. And then after it dries a little, it'll be hung up to dry and bleach in the sun. So that's the basic process of paper making, all illustrated in this one image here. Now, the Japanese have added certain techniques to the paper making process that has made Japanese paper particularly strong and particularly beautiful in many cases. The most important of these techniques is to add a vegetable mucilage called neri into the vat, the water suspension, to create a sort of slightly slimy consistency that enables the fibers to align with each other and interweave with each other, so that they are much more strongly bound to each other and create a much stronger, more durable sheet of paper. And this technique is called Nagashizuki, and it's one of the great innovations in Japanese paper making that has made paper so strong as well as very beautiful. Here are some examples of items created with paper. I'm sure you're all aware of all of these, but I just wanted to remind you that traditionally in Japan, paper has not only been used for printmaking, painting, for making books, but also for objects, many objects used in daily life, such as umbrellas and kites. I'm not sure kites are used daily, but they're functional objects and toys, but also in architecture, screens and shoji and fusuma and other screens and lamps have also been made out of paper. So there is a tradition of using paper, not just as a material for drawing and painting and printing, but also for creating objects used in daily life. Now, I'm going to introduce you to the 9 wonderful artists in the exhibition, starting with the great veteran paper maker, Kyoko Ibe, who is one of the most wonderful artists I've had the honor of working with. She is absolutely delightful. She has been working in washi paper art for a good 6 decades, and she continues to innovate to this day. She actually began exploring the potential for washi paper in contemporary art in the 1960s, and in the 70s was already becoming well known for her very innovative large-scale sculptures and installations that were being created out of washi paper. She makes her own paper herself, and you can see her here in this image. She is working, this is a very recent image showing her working on a large screen like the one that you'll be seeing in a moment, where she brings together the fibers, adds color in certain areas, and then manipulates the fibers to create beautiful patterns on her folding screens. She creates sculptures, installations, but she's also recently been working with theaters and theater directors to create beautiful set designs using washi as well. So she works in performing art as well, which is really, I think, really quite amazing for a washi artist. In the exhibition, we are featuring a number of her works, and this is one example that I think is really poetic. It's called Hanging Sail, and it's a work she created in the year 2000, so it's already 21 years old. But it's very simple in its structure. It's essentially made up of sheets of washi paper that are joined together end to end in a sort of zigzagging pattern. It's about 8 feet high, so it's quite a large sized piece. And despite its very simple structure, it's very stunning and dynamic, and looks like the sails of a ship or some other floating form. I think it's very spectacular, very simple. In contrast, a more complex work, which is much more typical of her work, is today. This pair of screens. This is an installation at the Allentown Museum of a pair of screens called Morning Glory that she's made in the last 10 years. I believe she made one in 2009, and I think the pair to it was made recently in the last couple of years. And these screens are made up of washi paper that she has made herself using different pigments and manipulating the fibers to create a sort of sense of an abstracted landscape, or maybe even a stormy seascape here. And it's very dynamic and very, very lyrical. And what makes it all the more spectacular is that she has been incorporating fragments of old documents from the Edo period, of tax forms and various documents she's been able to find from the 17th and 18th century. And she tears them up and she sort of interweaves them into the pulp so that you see these little fragments of stories, of reports, of conversations from centuries ago, interwoven with the pulp that she's using from today. So she mixes the ancient and the present really beautifully and poetically in her work. The next artist is Kakuko Ishii, who is a fiber artist based in Fukuoka in Kyushu. And she recently retired from teaching at Kyushu University and has also been a delight to work with. She works with washi in a very different way. She works with paper cords called mizuhiki, which have traditionally been used in Japan to wrap around, to tie up gifts, especially these money envelopes, and also sacred offerings for over 1,000 years in Japan. And typically these paper cords are red and white and black, and sometimes gold. And I'm sure many of you have seen them and hopefully received them occasionally. In her work, she takes these cords and she does something very different with them. She uses them to create very sort of organic forms that are woven together, often very tightly at the base and then very loosely at the top to give them a sense of sort of spreading outward. These wonderful forms that she calls musubu, which is the Japanese word for tie or bind or connect, are forms that she has been creating for the last couple of decades that really bring together nature and also abstraction, but also contemporary art forms, connect contemporary art forms with these very ancient cords that have been used in Japanese culture for many centuries. And these are really delightful works. To me, they remind me of haystacks and mushrooms and birds' nests. Here is an example. This is a group of red musubu pieces at the Allentown Museum. I only thought she was going to lend us one of them, but she's lent us something like 20 of these. So I was really surprised to see how many of them or maybe she sent one and it multiplied on the journey. So you see a group of red musubu pieces and then the white musubu further down the wall. And this is another piece by her that is a black and white musubu piece that's essentially white, but she's glazed the tips with this black sort of frosting that gives it the appearance of a misty forest. I just love this piece. This is my particular favorite of hers. The next artist is Yoshio Ikezaki, an artist who has worked both here in the United States. He actually teaches at Art Center in Pasadena. And he also works in Kyushu, and he also studied paper making and makes his own paper. He also makes his own sumi ink, and his work is basically, he has a body of work that he has paintings, but he also has sculptures, and they are all created using his own handmade paper and his own handmade sumi ink. His paintings are particularly interesting because these abstract landscapes of his are created with sumi ink on washi paper and water, of course, but he doesn't use a brush to paint them. He actually uses his own energy, his ki, to move the ink across the surface. And I've seen him doing this. It's quite extraordinary. He actually will drop ink onto the surface and sit and use ki to push the ink around the paper without touching the paper. It's extraordinary. So his work is made of washi paper, sumi ink, and water and energy. And he's created many of these landscapes, which he calls timeless auras. For his sculptures, again, he uses washi paper, sumi ink, which he infuses into the paper, and his energy to create these amazing forms that look like, for him, they are supposed to look like what happens when energy in nature collides. And what he does is he will take layers of washi paper and compress them together and create what looks to me like perhaps ancient tree bark or lava flows or even elephant skin. And they are absolutely exquisite. They're very, very abstract, but also very organic at the same time. They're very, very beautiful, lyrical, organic works of art. This series is known as the Earth Breathe series and has that sense of being connected to the earth. Some of the Earth Breathe series features text that he has inscribed either from Buddhist sutras, or he sometimes pastes pages from Edo period books onto the surface, so that not only do you have a sense of very organic form, but you have a sort of the additional stories or spiritual messages incorporated into these sculptures. And he has actually exhibited some of these inscribed forms at a Zen temple in Kyoto, in the meditation room of the temple, so that monks could use them to meditate upon. Now, the next artist is one who is probably familiar to many of you, or at least her family may be. Her name is Ayomi Yoshida, and she's the third generation of woodblock printmakers of the Yoshida family. Her grandfather was Hiroshi Yoshida. Her uncle was Toshi Yoshida, and her father was Hodaka Yoshida. And this is quite a lineage of woodblock print artists in Japan. And by the way, the women in the family are also extremely accomplished artists in painting and printmaking. Now, Ayomi, she creates works that have a natural theme. And as you can see here, she's carving a very stylized tree form into a woodblock in this image. Many of her works take elements of nature and stylize them and create abstractions, such as this image here of falling rain. This is a print that she made in 2019. It's called After the Rain Comes Fair Weather. And she's created a whole series of these beautiful, very evocative works that have these very simple geometric markings that evoke a sense of heavy rain pouring, probably in the summertime. She also creates work that is formed of patterns to evoke ripples on water. That's another of the motifs in her work. She also uses woodblock printing to create large-scale installations. This is an installation she created, I think, in 2007 at a gallery in Minnesota, I believe. And it's called Yedoensis, after a type of cherry blossom, the most common type of cherry blossom, I believe. And here you see she has created the image, or the shadow of tree trunks and tree branches across the wall, and has applied thousands of tiny little paper cherry blossoms that they have woodblock printed images of cherry blossoms on them. So she uses woodblock printing, but in a very innovative way. And the paper she uses is washi. So I reached out to her and asked her if she could make an installation using washi for this exhibition. And she created this beautiful work that she is calling Night Rain, Sleeping in the Rain. She created it this year. This is hot off the presses. She worked with paper makers to create these large sheets of paper, which she had dipped in vats of indigo dye. And she printed onto them, I don't think you can see it very well here, these drops of rain. You can see in this one sheet, the lighter sheet, there are drops of rain here, so that when you enter the installation, you feel like you're being surrounded by a very heavy, heavy rain. And in her work, she very often tries to connect her work with some sort of climate phenomenon, such as acid rain or the very heavy rains that Japan is having. And that's what's going on in this work. She is very aware of the environmental change and climate change, and she wants to draw attention to in her work to the idea that in Japan right now, rains are very, very heavy and causing a lot of flooding because of climate change. in the past in Japan, people associated rain with something positive, and it would be calming and they could fall asleep to the sound of rain. Today in Japan in the rainy season, people worry that there will be flooding because the rains are so heavy. So she's created this work as a way of hoping for a future when we can have that sensation of calm when we hear rain again. I love this piece. It's very, very powerful. And you really get a sense of the texture and the strength of the washi paper in it. The next artist is Eriko Horiki, who is based in Kyoto, and she was a banker who had an account with some echizen paper makers. And when she saw their paper making, she gave up her career in banking and decided she wanted to learn how to make washi paper herself. And she decided to devote her life to finding new ways to incorporate washi paper into contemporary life. And she has succeeded in this. And the paper that she creates now is spectacular, and honestly is what inspired my idea several years ago, in 2017, actually, to create a washi exhibition. She has a studio in Kyoto. When you go there next, go and visit her studio. It is breathtaking. She creates large-scale washi walls that are often full, have layers of fibers in them and different colors inside the layers that can only be seen when they're illuminated, either from behind or from the front. And you can see one of her walls here. She works with architects and architectural firms, creating these large scale walls in public, in buildings, hotels, restaurants, and they are very successful in changing the mood of the interior space, so that just as shoji screens can soften the atmosphere in a Japanese traditional interior, she tries to soften and warm up the atmosphere in a contemporary interior, using the fibers, the colors in the fibers, and also the lighting very masterfully to do this. For the exhibition, she wasn't able to lend us a massive wall because this is a traveling exhibition. So she created this screen, a folding screen with a design of a sunflower that really reminds us of the importance of light in her work. The designs in her works are only visible when the object has been lit, has been illuminated from the front or the back or from inside. And so she's really a master of creating pattern and then illuminating it with light. And so you see the screen and a table lamp that she has lent us as one piece. And then another group of objects she's lent to the exhibition are these illuminated sort of abstract sculptures, which kind of look like lamps, but they really are kind of more than lamps. They almost have a life of their own. There's a group called the Seeds and a group called the Stones. And they are each these very organic forms that have been patterned by fibers that have been sort of laid out very carefully across the surface to create a beautiful texture and to enhance the form of each of these works. They're so soft and beautiful and organic. These little groupings that she creates, they remind me of rocks in a Japanese dry landscape garden in a Buddhist temple. They're so beautiful and calming and poetic. The next artist is very different. He is Takaki Tanaka, and he likes to manipulate the fibers of paper in a way that makes them look very different from the original material. He likes to evoke elements of the natural world, but also in a very structured, almost architectural way. Here is an image of his work called Land of Nest. And this, I believe, was shown at Japan Society in a fiber art exhibition a few years ago. That's how I learned about his work. And what he does is he creates modules out of paper fibers that he attaches, he stretches over strings made of flax, I believe, and hemp, to create what look like very organic nests, possibly made by some creature in nature. Each of these modules, he will use a number of modules to build a larger structure with, so that each of them looks like a nest created by an animal, perhaps, but the larger structure is definitely created by a human. It's much more engineered and much more geometric looking. Here's a detail of some of the fibers. He takes the paper fibers and stretches them over these strings and wets them to help create new forms. And then when the forms dry, they retain their shape and they're very solid looking. So these have come up a great distance from looking like sheets of paper. So he's basically deconstructing the paper in order to reconstruct a three-dimensional form. And then he adds pigment as well to create these very really interesting looking organic forms. This is another type of form that it's in the exhibition as well. A lot less chaotic, much more meticulously, geometrically layered. But even though it's much more, it's less chaotic looking, it still has the appearance of something created in nature, almost like a honeycomb or something created by a creature in nature, perhaps not human. The next artist is Yuko Kimura, and she's an artist who has worked between Japan and the United States. She's based most of the time in Cleveland, and it creates amazing works that are collages of prints, textiles, and a lot of interesting uses of washi paper. She brings together, she makes her own washi paper, and you can see her doing that here. And she also practices printmaking using techniques that were developed in the West, such as etching and aqua tint. She also dyes paper with indigo, which is a traditional Japanese technique. And she brings together all these techniques, as well as and incorporates traditional scraps of Japanese indigo dyed cotton and antique books. And she creates amazing collages that have a sense of, transcending time. And here we see one of her collages that is in the exhibition called Edo Sky 2. And it's made up of pages from an Edo period astronomy book and scraps of indigo dyed cotton cloth, as well, that have been sewn with sashiko stitching. And you can see one of the details of her work are these insect nibbles or mushikui that create lovely patterning in the background. So here it's a real sort of collage. Her work is a real collage of different materials from the past. This is another example of her work called Shiwa Shiwa, which means wrinkle, wrinkle. And she has twisted the washi paper and dyed it with indigo and then combined it with sheets from an Edo period book that she's also twisted to create this very wrinkled patchwork of paper, of washi paper that is it evokes the sea, it evokes the sky. There's something very profound and timeless, but also very ancient about it. And this one I love. This is part of her mushikui or insect nibble series, where she combines paper that has been dyed with indigo with old antique papers that have been nibbled by insects, and she etches onto the papers as well to create this collage of decay that is actually very beautiful and lace-like and poetic in its texture and its appearance. Her work it's very unique and wonderful. This is an artist I discovered when looking for artists who are doing very different things with washi paper, and her name is Hina Aoyama. She lives in the south of France, but she has spent the last 20 years working with Japanese origami paper to create paper cuttings that are much more than kirie, which are the traditional Japanese paper cuttings. They're very lace-like and very, very intricate. Here's an example of her work, a group called Les Papillons, the butterflies, that are made of black origami paper, which she cuts with scissors, not with an X-Acto knife. She uses the finest scissors to cut these very intricate forms out of the paper. They're very lace-like, very beautiful. She usually works with natural forms, and most of her works, they're just spectacularly beautiful. But in the case of the butterflies, she actually created them in part to protest the practice of capturing and collecting butterflies as a hobby, because she finds that really awful. And so she instead creates these butterflies out of cut paper and pins them onto a surface the way that many collectors have traditionally pinned real butterflies. So there's a little bit of social protest in this beautiful lace-like work. This is my favorite piece by her. It's a section of text by Voltaire. She takes text and also sheet music by composers, and she copies it in this black origami paper using her scissors to create the finest detail. So you not only have this cursive script and lettering, but you also have these beautiful floral details of leaves at the end of each line. It boggles the mind how she does this, but it's very intricate, very beautiful. And the final artist is Yuko Nishimura, and I actually worked with her in my Above the Fold origami exhibition. She doesn't call herself an origami artist. She's a paper folding artist. She creates sculptures and wall-mounted pieces by folding paper. And the type of washi she works with is called Kyoko Ishii, and it's a handmade paper that was created from the 19th century onwards. It's a later type of handmade paper that was used for official documents from the Meiji period on. And this paper is very smooth and very white, very, very pristine looking. And you can see how in her work, she uses it very carefully. She folds her paper using mountain fold, which is basically this, and valley fold, which is this. These are origami folds. She uses very simple folding techniques, but uses them very carefully and masterfully to create beautiful light effects in her works. She creates three-dimensional sculptures like this work here, which is called Continuous Form, and she created it in 2020 for this exhibition. And here she's taken a long sheet of paper and pleated it, and then twisted it and turned it, and then connected the ends to create this beautiful sculpture that sort of evokes infinity and is just geometric, but really sensual at the same time. Most of her works that are better known works are these wall pieces, and they're often circular. So they're almost like a sort of mandala in form, a very spiritual sort of, or a Zen circle in the way that they draw you in. They have this amazing intense power to draw you closer. They are made up of these mountain and valley folds. Again, very simple folding, but she does the folding so intricately and in a very calculated way, so that the folds create this interplay of light and shadow to make the piece look much deeper than it actually is. Most of these are only about half a centimeter, maybe a centimeter deep. But when you look at them, they look so much deeper. They look like they're almost three-dimensional. And these, I don't know the names of these pieces. She made them very recently, but series that she creates that look like this, usually called shine or sparkle. So there's a sense of sun and the power of the sun in her work. I'm just gonna, since she's the last artist, I'm gonna end with one of her thoughts about paper in Japanese culture. The word paper is kami in Japanese, and the word for a higher being or spirit in traditional Japan is also kami. Now, these words are written with different Chinese characters, but she believes that there's a very strong connection between paper in Japan and the spirit world, the kami, the higher beings or the deities that are believed to inhabit Japan's landscape and the whole world. I would say that I agree that there is something very deep about paper in Japan and the Japanese relationship with paper. So I'm gonna leave it at that, and I believe there should be enough time for questions. I'm very happy to take questions from our audience today, and thank you so much for your attention. I hope you enjoyed all these artworks as much as I have over the years.
Meher, what a wonderful program. And I'm going to ask Helen to present Meher in a little bit more vantage point here, if you would, please, for us.
Should I stop?
Are you not able to see her?
Okay, as long as the audience can see her. Meher, this has been a fantastic opportunity for all of us to meet you, those of us who haven't seen you before and who did not know about the types of exhibitions that you've been doing over the course of your career. And I would like to, before we get into some of the numerous comments and questions of this very, very popular program tonight, I would like to ask you some questions about what you consider to be the distinguishing features in the way you evaluate washi arts and making your selections. Are you looking for technical prowess? Are you looking at the way that color and different types of paper are utilized? Or is it the form and the power of the form that you feel is most important for the viewer?
That's a great question, Amy. For me, for this exhibition, I was looking for artists who were doing something truly remarkable and very different from what I'd seen before. I had worked with Yuko Nishimura before, so I knew her work, but she's doing something very different from any other paper folding artists I know in Japan. With Kakuko Ishii, for example, taking paper cords and creating sculptures out of these paper cords, to me was truly unique and original. And Takaki Tanaka was taking paper and then kind of shredding it and deconstructing it. So that was very different. So each of the artists was doing something very different with paper that I don't think anybody else necessarily is. And there is a little bit of overlap with what Kyoko Ibe is doing, like with the documents, bringing in the old documents in the contemporary pulp, into the contemporary pulp, and what Yuko Kimura is doing with her old, bringing in the old texts and kind of collaging it together with textiles and her own washi paper. But again, there's something unique that Yuko likes to focus on, the insect nibbling. That's sort of one of the areas that she is very focused on. And I love the idea that we consider those insects as destroying the paper, but she sees them as adding something to the paper, creating their own art in the paper. So I love that she takes them and kind of credits their artistic input as well. So for me, each of these artists was doing something very unique. And some of them were cutting the paper, some of them were folding it, some of them were tearing it apart, some of them were molding it. So I was looking for different actions that were being used, so that connected the artist to the material. So I wanted to have a real variety of different actions. I hope that answers the question.
We've often seen Kyoko Ibe's work being suspended from ceilings. And now we learn also today from Lauren Perlman, who's joined us, that Eriko Horiki's work is visible at Narita Airport, which I didn't realize. So that we see things that are really in tremendous scale. That might be a surprise to some people. But I think that people are interested in how you came to organize this exhibition. How did you do it? Did you know the artists throughout your career? Have you been following Washi as a curator in the field and keeping track of this, or were you finding new artists and new ideas coming forth?
Thank you. It was a bit of all of the above. I had finished the exhibition Above the Fold, working with paper folding and origami artists, and I was looking for a new exhibition to propose to international arts and artists. And as I said, I wanted to do something kind of similar that, was taking something traditional, but showing how it had evolved. And I have loved washi paper ever since I was a student studying Japanese, and I just fell in love with the paper. I think we all have. And I started noticing that there were a number of rather extraordinary artists working with washi paper, and in the contemporary art world, they were starting to get more attention. And some of the artists I knew already. I knew of Kyoko Ibe. I hadn't been in touch with her directly, but got in touch with her, and she has been delightful through the whole process. I knew Ayomi Yoshida. I've known her for a few years, and I knew Yuko Nishimura. But I knew Yoshio Ikezaki because he's been based locally. And but the others, I just started looking for them and asking around, and people directed me to them. And I decided to keep it to 9 because a few years ago I had curated an exhibition with 45 origami artists, and it was very complicated. And I promised myself I would never work on an exhibition with that many artists again. So 9 seems like a good number. And it's a good cosmic number as well. So it just seemed like a safe number. And so once I got to 9, I stopped and thought, this is perfect, because one of the things I was looking for in this exhibition was a good number of artworks that could be on the wall, some artworks that could be hung from the ceiling, and some that could be on the floor. I like to be able to fill a whole space in these exhibitions. So it was some of the decisions were practical, but I also wanted a good variety of different artworks and different approaches to the art and scale as well. I was looking for different scales, because that's always surprising to people. But when we think of paper, we think of a sheet of paper that fits on our desk. But when showing how impressive these artists' work is, I think it's important to show the scale that a lot of these artists are working on. I think that's really extraordinary.
And today, so many people around us in our country and Europe are seeking out new ideas for design and designing from Japan. And obviously, washi is one of the key mediums that people are looking to. We have a question. Can you speak more about the ways that the artists in the exhibition use written text in their contemporary works?
Mm-hmm. So especially Kyoko Ibe and Yuko Kimura, they have taken fragments of these old documents, and they buy old books from antique stores, and these books are often in pretty bad shape. So they tear pages up, and they take either handwritten text or printed text. Oh, and also Yoshio Ikezaki, he incorporates pastes paper onto his sculptures as well. They have often found out first what the texts were about, whether they're like a tax document or some sort of report about a government report or a story, or maybe something more philosophical like a Buddhist sutra. And they will choose the text quite carefully. I don't think they randomly use the words, because I think it's important to them, and unless I've misunderstood, it's important to them what they signify and what those words are saying in the larger work into which they're incorporated. I haven't spoken to them, each of them, to find out, you know, how they choose the words and how they choose the fragments. But it seems to me that they are trying to evoke, each of them are trying to bring an old voice from another time into the present moment in their work. It seems the dialogue between them today as artists and people who wrote something several hundred years ago is really important to them. I don't know that I have more than that to say about that.
I think it's certainly something to explore. And many people who are joining us today are specialists in more traditional Japanese art and realize and recall that very frequently words are used in a very abstracted way in early Japanese paper and poetry. And I think that you might want to make a connection at some point in the future. Meher, we have many questions about technique. I think we may have people who are actually artists in our audience tonight. And one has asked, how is the washi paper applied? Is there a special glue, or how is that done?
That seems to differ depending on the artist. I know that some of them use glue. I'm trying to remember exactly who uses glue, but I know that Yoshio Ikezaki, a lot of the artists will actually just use washi and paper. So for example, when Yoshio Ikezaki is creating his sculptures made of piles of paper, they're just washi and ink and water, and he compresses them all together. However, he does paste a sheet onto the surface, so there is some glue involved. And I don't think Tanaka uses glue in his nests, although they look like they have some sort of glue or resin in them. But on the list of materials, there's no glue. I think that water has long worked with the fibers and perhaps there's this neri that is used, this vegetable mucilage that is used in paper making that kind of works as a sort of glue to help strengthen the paper. So the fibers connection. So I believe that works sort of like a glue. But some of the artists, I'm sorry, I can't remember exactly who uses glue, but I think that most of them don't, because there is this natural sort of adhesive in the pulp mixture that allows the various different fibers to adhere to each other. I'm trying to, maybe I should go back and see.
And then do you know, under some of the other three-dimensional objects, is there any structure beneath, or are they just built layer upon layer?
So these works, I believe, there is a metal structure for each of the modules of this. There is a metal frame, and then there are these strings, and then the paper fibers are twisted around the string. So there is a metal structure here. Yeah, here it is. You can see it in each of the units. These, I think, are just paper. I have a feeling that she uses a mold to create the forms, but I haven't asked her exactly how she does it. Sometimes I don't think to ask until the exhibitions go up, and then people ask me, how did they make this? And then I have to go back and ask the artist, because I'm just blown away by how beautiful they are, and I forget to ask how they make them. That was the same with some of the origami exhibitions. I didn't ask their technique, partly because I think it's their secret, but yes, I often don't think to ask. The screens here have a wooden frame, just as a typical byobu would. I'm trying to find some more examples with structures in the exhibition. So no. And then these are they are held together, I believe, with just the water in her works.
Well, these objects just give us such joy. And I can't tell you how many comments about this have come through the website and the chat this evening. And many people are asking about the tour. And I just want to tell our audience, and by the way, we have a huge audience today. It's one of our most popular programs ever. So Meher, we congratulate you. But we are going to be posting a link to the exhibition, and it lists also all of the venues. So hopefully it will come to some of you in the near future. And already people have written that they're ready to get on the way to Allentown. They want to see it there first. You know, as we're just coming to the end of this program, and of course we would love to see more objects with you. Maybe another program as the show travels. It will be traveling for over a year, so there'll be opportunities to see it with you again. And thank you, Meher, for all that you've offered to us over the years, and especially with this exhibition. And for all of our audience, please do check our website, because not only the venues, but information about the catalog will soon be on the website with a copy of tonight's presentation. And for those of you who are interested, we hope that you will join us for our next webinar, which will be on November 3rd at 5 p.m., when Met Museum curators Medill Harvey and Monica Binsick will explore new documentary information about the wonderful designer and collector, Edward C. Moore, who was associated with Tiffany & Company in its very early years, and who bequeathed over 800 Japanese objects to the Metropolitan Museum in 1891 upon his death. The impact of the Japanese objects that were collected have an obvious connection to the designs in other media that we've often had discussed, but now with this new research, we can demonstrate the precise Japanese objects that inspired those Tiffany objects in silver and other media, and how they came into Moore's collection. So we will be going back in time once again, and we look forward to seeing you all. Thank you very much, and good night.